And ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a treat because we have two very experienced academic faculty members and educators, Dr. Poonam Anand and Dr. Starr Ackley from the Bahrain Teachers College, University of Bahrain, who will be sharing their breadth of experience and knowledge with you. And they will be tackling on a very relevant topic, which is assessment of 21st century skills and academic literacies from theory to practice. The floor to both of you, Dr. Poonam and Dr. Starr Ackley. Dr. Ackley, could you unmute? Thank you.
Yes, is this working now?
That's fine.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm Starr. My colleague Poonam Anand, Dr. Poonam, will begin the presentation and she will be advancing the slides. So the floor is for Dr. Poonam and I'm all ears.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Starr. So the topic of our presentation is assessment of 21st century skills and academic literacies from theory to practice. Now, through this presentation, we would like to argue that the developments in the field of assessment are not really keeping up with the developments either in theory or in pedagogy, and there are misalignments between teaching these skills and measuring these academic literacies and 21st century skills. So today we will just talk about what 21st century skills are and also academic literacies and how they are assessed, what are the similarities and differences between these two, and what misalignments are there in measuring academic literacies, as well as the high stakes proficiency English language testing. And we will discuss about retentions and changes to assessments in these two skills. So we will start with what are 21st century skills. Now, there's no single widely accepted definition of 21st century skills. Different groups and organizations have given us a set of different knowledge and skills that we require in the 21st century, as just the moderator read a couple of skills that were just discussed a couple of minutes ago. However, Suthu and ILES categorize them in broad four categories: ways of thinking, for example, problem solving, or ways of working, for example, communication and collaboration, or tools for working, for example, knowing IT skills, having IT skills, or skills for living in the world like wider leaderships or skills for work or career. We decided to divide these four categories into two processes. First one is mental and cognitive, internal processes, and social or behavioral, which are external processes. Now, when we look at assessment, we see that there is a problem in the sense that we do have measures for mental or cognitive skills, but we don't have enough assessments for measuring these social or behavioral skills. So we just made this table. So ways of thinking, probably just like critical thinking or learning to learn. ICT literacies are more within a learner, whereas ways and tools of working or living in the world are the external processes that I just mentioned about. So, as I said earlier, now there are no widespread, commonly applied measures of 21st century skills, but there are some positive models. For example, we have the Cambridge University admission test for different subjects, for example, computer science or BMAT for biomedical test. Also, we have courses on critical thinking, for example, AS or A-level. However, these courses, again, the measure of these critical thinking skills are more through multiple choice questions. The performance assessment is not as widespread. We did see, although in ETS, I-Skills assessment, users did have take up real-world problem-solving scenarios. There are models, but they're not that frequent. So what are the issues then in assessing 21st century skills? So we have this question of validity and reliability simply because we don't have clear construct definitions. What are we measuring? What do we want to measure? So there are no clear construct definitions. For example, if we take, let's say, creativity, now it involves all senses and it's almost infinite, or we cannot put it into boundaries. Although we can assess the quality of a product, but we are not sure about how to measure the internal processes which go on in creativity. And then we have the issue of objectivity versus subjectivity. If we are talking about performance assessment, how much do we talk about the depth or detail of reporting, kind of rubrics, to develop different kinds of rubrics for different performances. And then the value, what value do we attach to assessment? Usually, if something is easy, we measure it, right, rather than what is important to measure. And then, as I said earlier, a few assessments are there to measure social processes skills. And we will talk about this later in our presentation. So academic literacies now, new literacy studies as proposed by Leah and Street says that it's a social act. So to become socialized into their discourse community, students need to learn how to communicate in particular ways, or to how to be like particular kind of people, for example, write or speak like doctors or engineers or scientists. And also, while students learn these, they gradually become bona fide members of their discipline and discourse community. So not only they shape that, but they're also shaped by that discipline and its discourse. So basically, is to be part of a discourse community. So what are the goals of academic, what are the goals of English for academic purposes literacies? Now, the short-term goal, of course, is that students need to learn about the branch of academia that they're entering in, and they need to learn the interactional competence within that particular community. But the long-term goal is to be part of a professional discourse community, and so what we call situated cognition, and to have that interactional professional behavior. Now, studies of international predictive validity studies of international tests, for example, IELTS of TOEFL, have repeatedly pointed to us that there is not much correlation between language proficiency and academic success. So students need something more than just having this knowledge, body of knowledge and skills of a particular language, but they also need to have a body of communicative acts. They need to have knowledge of that. So it's not just two dimensions of knowing a text, for example, reader and a book, or a text or screen these days, but also it is a three-dimensional, that to be in a community and to be part of that community and contribute to that professional discourse community. And that's the third dimension that my colleague Dr. Starr will continue about. Over to you, Dr. Starr.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Poonam. As we see this, and I need to explain that we'll see we are trying to establish a parallel between the 21st century skills and the academic literacies. So there may be some small amount of redundancies in our slides as we try to make that parallel clear. What we see in both of them then is that there's this significant dimension realized in social interaction. If we want to give it another name, we can call it agency. How do we move students from text-based knowledge into the ability to act as professionals? And as we quote Bastia, both academic literacies and 21st century skills require a dialogic or interdiscursive performance enacted in professional practice. So this is the focus of our inquiry. How can we access and assess the externally visible interactions in our students' work? As we see, we have 3 dimensions, as we've pointed out: the linguistic, which is text internal, the cognitive, also text internal, and the performative, which is external to the text and the text-based types of assessments that we have traditionally used. Now, what we're using this slide primarily to show you where you can find definitions of the different types of skills and the 3 levels that we speak of. And we see that some even very powerful names in second language acquisition and in academic English proficiency, such as Highland, are still bound within the text. They're still text internal and not yet text external. So we need to see not just the ability to use a genre of discourse, but to enact them appropriately in social context. How do you express disagreement, perhaps in a conference like this one? How do you reach consensus in your question and answer? How do you negotiate the power dynamics and the authority dynamics of your academic practice? We realize, of course, that graduate students are in a very different situation from tenured faculty. Or as I tell my teaching practice students when they enter the schools, you are no longer a 4th-year student at the top of the food chain. You're now a trainee teacher at the bottom of the food chain. And that takes a certain adjustment in how you interact with different people. So we do see that unlike the 21st century skills, there are tests widely in use to assess academic English, but they don't assess all the purposes for which academic literacy are needed, to wit, the performative aspects. Okay, so what kind of assessment types do we have? We've pretty much pointed out that there are language skills tests, there are integrated skills assessment tests, and I think we need to show that these are also appropriate for native speakers who are learning academic literacy, as well as people who are learning academic literacies as English as a second language. Similarly, we have content area tests. We've mentioned the Cambridge admission tests. There's a test of academic literacy level developed in South Africa. There are the various graduate record examination subject tests and the LSAT or pre-law test and the MCAT or pre-medical school test used in North America. As my colleague Dr. Poonam has said, we've really just found this one example of competence used through measured through interactive simulations. And we're hoping that perhaps this might prove to be a model that can be adapted for using interactive simulations to measure the mastery of disciplinary genres in presentations, group work projects, and so on. Now, right now, we do use assessment of performative aspects of academic performance, but these are not widely distributed. Now, here, the main point is to show you we can line up program goals and assessment goals, but we see in the third aspect, which is the interaction in the discursive spaces of academia or future professional life, these are absent from assessment. So what are our difficulties or our dilemmas in assessing academic literacy? The first is an excessive reliance on skills that are general language tests, and those are primarily the international tests such as the IELTS and the TOEFL that we've mentioned. Now, this may be a problem of language policy, that the persons who are mandating that these tests be used are not the ones best able to determine what kind of assessment would be best. We have the unfortunate problem we pointed out previously of reducing academic literacy and language literacy to the same thing, which they are not. We also have to strike a balance between validity and reliability when we move into performative assessments. We will have difficulty in setting standards of measurement for sociopragmatic and interactional competencies. And finally, we haven't got any models that we can examine or that we can extend for use in academic literacy assessment. So what should we keep and what should we change in the assessment as we see it now? We want to be sure not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. The IELTS, the TOEFL, and the other tests that we have mentioned are perfectly good for the purpose for which they are designed. What we're trying to point out today is that they're being used for a purpose for which they are not designed and for which they are inappropriate. So what changes do we need? These changes, the first set of changes we propose, may be possible to adopt a machine readable form, and that would be to measure the ability to work between multiple texts rather than working within single texts. Now, the final change is going to be a bit more difficult, and it's shared in part with 21st century skills. We need to be able to measure the responsive and interactional competencies, the give and take interchanges that are typical of the academic surroundings and of the workplace. Things that require real life time question and answer. We need to be able to measure participative production, collaboration, and we need to be able to measure the ability to think on your feet, to automatically adjust your thinking as you receive new information. We suggest authentic assessments in real or simulated circumstances. Now, they don't exist yet. They need to be developed. What are the obstacles to change? Basically, the obstacles are the really positive aspects of the machine-readable international tests. They're cost-effective, they're reliable, they're rapid, and you don't have to be physically present. Now, the negative aspects are of what we propose are that they're very expensive in terms of human resources. It will require a lot of training. We have to have norming sessions for inter-rater training, and those must be repeated on a regular basis for the skills of the raters to remain valid. Raters need more time to process and report their assessments than machines do, and people may need to be physically present for these assessments. So what are our conclusions? We need to align our theory, our curriculum and pedagogy, and our assessment in both 21st century skills and English for academic purpose literacies. The definitions we've presented include language acts in shared spaces, interactions, professional agency. So our curriculum should specifically address development of these social interaction skills. In our pedagogy and in our teaching materials, we need to move from texts to applications in both professional and academic spaces. So we need to move from the text internal, the paper at the screen, to the text internal and include interpersonal interactions and simulations. We give you here our references. We hope you'll find them interesting. We thank you very much for your careful listening, and we hope that you'll have many questions for us that we can address later. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Poonam and Dr. Ackley. It was an amazing presentation. And let's see, we have some thought-provoking questions for you from Dr. Tamim Ansari. He has a series of 3 questions, which I would like to ask one by one so that you will be able to dig deep into the matter. The first question, in our attempts to evaluate the learning outcomes, don't we apply a reductionist approach which seriously limits the scope and dimensions of learning?
Well, if I may, I think what you're asking is basically a confirmation. I think the answer to this question is yes, we are in agreement with your way of thinking on this, and you are entirely right.
Thank you there, Dr. Ackley. The second question Dr. Tamim has posed is, do we need to necessarily measure the learning outcomes for our evaluative purpose?
Dr. Poonam, would you like to try that one?
I'm not sure what his question is, because I know he's asking about learning outcomes, but related to what? Because I don't have the question in front of me here.
I would read that question for you one more
Sure.
time.
Yeah.
Do we need to necessarily measure the learning outcomes for our evaluative purpose?
So which evaluative, that's what I said, I'm not able to get that evaluative purpose. Is it as a teacher we are talking about, or is it to evaluate those learning outcomes that he's referring to?
Dr. Tamim, would you like to clarify on that? You can just pose the second part of that question so that Dr. Poonam will be able to take that. Okay, in the meantime, there is another question from Dr. Tamim. How can we account for the incidental learning that has already slipped away from our rubrics?
Yeah, that's again an interesting question. I think sometimes we do see, like, for example, if we are talking about literacies, academic literacies, that we are pointing out that being a member of that community, so it may not be direct, but you could have indirect relevance to that opportunity which you are referring to. Yeah,
Thank
for
you.
example, like if maybe we may not have covered something in our presentation, but it is indirectly related to, for example, question and answer that we have here.
Excuse me, if I might jump in there, I would say I think we could call this the constructivist aspect of learning through dialogue in the academic area. And I think that will be difficult to measure, but when we pointed out that we could look for appropriateness of response, and maybe that might cover the question of incidental learning. What has been the constructivist input from the interaction in either an academic space or a professional space?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Thank you, Dr. Poonam and Dr. Ackley. I have one question here. You mentioned about one of the dilemmas in assessing academic literacy is where we assess we are unable to assess skills which are beyond the text. So in my opinion, I view that this is one of the things that we have grappled with for decades, or if not the century. Do you see a future where we will shift away or move away from this rigidness?
I certainly hope so. And I think our previous speaker gave us an excellent lead in there when she was talking about using case studies, because case studies are going to be one of the ways we can start to move students away from just learning what's in the text to applying their knowledge. And case study training is a very good lead-in to a performative application of skills that people are adapting.
Thank you, Dr. Ackley. Dr. Tamim has clarified his question. He meant evaluating the learning outcome for the purpose of quality assurance purposes. So I read the question again. Do we need to necessarily measure the learning outcomes for our evaluative purposes, which refers to the learning outcome for the purpose of quality assurance purposes?
Good question, and I see that you're trying to, join these two, because you see the learning purposes that we have in our curriculum. I think what probably we can assess is in the curriculum, right? So match our curriculum and the assessment, but then sometimes you may have different set of objectives for quality assurance purposes. So if they are all tied up, then definitely yes, I would say that. I hope that clarifies. I'm not sure.
Dr. Ackley, would you like to say something on that?
Well, I think we're obligated. We are obligated professionally and we're obligated institutionally to provide this information. Now, the problem has been that we haven't had assessments that necessarily match our stated objectives. There was a very interesting study done a few years ago where a group of professors in the GCC was examining the course syllabus for higher order thinking skills and then looking to see whether those higher order thinking skills were actually assessed on the course final examinations, and they found they were not. So we see that we do have this continuous difference between the curriculum that we intend to deliver and that perhaps we do actually deliver, and the ways in which we assess it. And that's specifically what we have sought to point out today.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ackley and Dr. Poonam. That was indeed a treat from both of you, and thank you for such an insightful presentation. I'm sure all of us would have really benefited and we have been enriched by your knowledge and experience. Thank you very much, and we thank all of you who have posted the questions in the chat box. If you have further questions, please post it, and we will be certainly be able to take on those questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your lovely words. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Now, as we wait for the next presenter, let's just take 30 seconds again and let me know what are the biggest challenges that you face in assessment in this current era, in this COVID in the pandemic situation. What is the biggest challenge that you face as an educator during this time in terms of assessment? You can just share with us in the chat so that we can learn from each other. Making sure that students are not copying their answers from each other. Yeah, that's very much our challenge as well. Qualitative assessment. We can't see the students. Yep. Engage. Anyone else? I'm sure we could all relate to this, yeah? Wherever you are. If you want them to do field work, it's difficult because they can't mix socially. Appropriate practical assessment method. Yes, thank you. As you're doing that, there is a poll up there on your screen for Dr. Poonam Anand and Dr. Starr Ackley. Please give us your feedback. I'm sure that they would appreciate it. Thank you very much for doing both at the same time. Multitasking, technical issue, yes, that's one of the biggest challenge in assessment. Authenticity of the assessment, thank you. Appropriate practical assessment method, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move to our next presentation, I hope that you take time to fill up the poll. If it is, I hope it is up there on your screen, and if you can't see it, please let us know. And as soon as you have done that, we would like to ask you to take a 5 minutes break, go and grab a cup of tea or coffee wherever you are, and then we would be back in 5 minutes from now. Thank you very, very much.
Good morning. I don't know if you guys can hear me.